Hello friends, welcome to Living Wisely, Living Well, and we will share the inspiration for today, Jan 29th, as shared by Swami Kriyananda through this book, Living Wisely, Living Well. Today is Jan 29th, and Swamiji's inspiration for today is: concentrate on your present commitments. Don't dwell regretfully on past failures. Your life will keep on improving if at this very moment you do your very best. I have seen that this is one of the most handy reference books that we may have to overcome any trouble, challenges that we are going through in life. In just a short line or two, Swamiji gives us the solutions to our everyday challenges. So today he's talking about failures and how it is important that we not dwell on failures but rather move forward, take the next step towards our goal. In Paramahansa Yoganandaji's ashram in Los Angeles, there was a woman disciple who lived with the master for a few years. And then she began to feel a little dissatisfied, feeling that she would find better prospects in the world. And so despite master's dissuasion and requesting her to stay in the ashram, for that she would benefit much from being in the ashram, she refused and soon left the ashram, much to everyone's dismay. And a few years into her time in the world, she realized that she wasn't finding happiness, that this was not what she expected, and she decides to return back to the ashram. Now, when she comes back to the ashram, her friends are taken aback and also a little inwardly, maybe a little surprised that she came back. And they asked her, how could you dare to show your face around here again after you left the master? And the woman, wise that she had become from her years of experience in the world, she said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to worship my mistakes? And what a beautiful outlook and lesson and instruction that she gives through her response, that we tend to often glorify our mistakes, and we think that we are doing a good thing by feeling guilty about it and by dwelling in it for too long, thinking that is the way that we will learn our lessons from it. But often what we end up doing is we tend to focus on a negative aspect of our nature, which is natural because this is a play of duality, and the play of duality happens through this body, mind and spirit as well. Unless we consciously, with deliberate intention, keep our focus, our aspirations pointed on the positive side of life. So it's interesting how, as a society, we train our children, we tend to look at ourselves and others with a sense of criticism, disdain or judgment. When people fail to meet our expectations, or when circumstances fail to meet our expectations, we are very hard on ourselves and on others. Like in the story that, with this disciple of Master, that we tend to shame others and shame ourselves. And it might be interesting to ask ourselves, why is this so, that we treat failure in such a negative way? I have seen as children, when we grow up, we are given a very strong orientation towards what is good and what is bad. And good is met with rewards, and anything that is bad is met with punishment. And as a society, we tend to be very moralistic, and overly moralistic to the degree that it can become very judgmental, leading to social ostracism, outcasting people, shunning people, and in general, not being able to support people when they need our support the most. For it is when we fall, when we fail, that we really look forward to that pat on the back that tells us, hey, come on, let's get up and move forward. And that's exactly the moment when we want to put ourselves and others down. There's this beautiful story that is shared, and this is about the time of the Great Depression, and this well-known industrialist businessman, he was trying to restore his business and getting things up and going after the depression. And in a bid to get successful again, he was creating this huge inventory because he was expecting to secure $1 million government contract. And his salesman, his best salesman, was at the job. But unfortunately, the salesman was not able to secure the contract, and he was aghast because his employer had invested so much money in, hopeful of this contract. And so he decides to give in his resignation. So he goes to his boss and hands him the resignation letter. And his boss looks at the letter, looks at him, and tells him, "Why would you want me to accept this when I have just invested millions of dollars in your education?" And what a beautiful way to look at failure, that it could be an education, it could be a way of learning lessons, it could be the unfolding of a whole new world that we wouldn't otherwise discover. We know many beautiful stories, examples of well-known people, Steve Jobs, Walt Disney, Elvis Presley, of people who overcame failure and went on to become great successes through perseverance, through determination, through believing in themselves. And Steve Jobs is, we have heard his beautiful remark when he said that being fired from Apple was one of the best things that happened to me, because it took me into the most creative phase of my life. We never know what's hiding behind that failure, what's around that bend. If we can learn to look at things with the right perspective, what does that mean? Often, friends, through long conditioning, we tend to look at things in terms of the form, at ourselves in terms of this body, of what we can do, of what this body, this mind can achieve. We look at each one of us as separate from one another, and this is all good for the material plane, but this material plane is not the only reality. There is a reality greater than what we are just seeing or feeling with the senses. And if it depends on the way we look at things, from that vantage point, things look different. When we look at things from the point of sense of our sensorial experiences alone, we see a very limited view. But when we consider ourselves to be children of God, when we look at ourselves as sparks of that infinite spirit, for the scriptures themselves say that ye are gods, that when we look at ourselves from that vantage point, we will find a lot of possibilities, and a lot of possibilities, a lot of hope, a lot of encouragement, rather than discouragement, rather than failure. There is again there is this beautiful conversation shared by, again, a very successful entrepreneur. She said as she was growing up, her dad would call her brother and her onto the dining table, and over food they would discuss the failures of the day, and not to kind of beat them about their failures, but the father would encourage them and ask them how they felt, what did they learn from it. He would never get disappointed or upset about their failures, but it spurred them into thinking positively about their failures. And she said one of the most important lessons for her from that activity was it helped her reframe her understanding of failure. She said failure was, for me, was not a specific outcome, but it was about not trying enough. And she said, as a parent, as she's bringing her kids up, she said, as a parent, I make sure that I praise my children for their efforts, not so much children for themselves and in their in an egoistic way, but for the efforts that they put out towards a goal, towards an activity. And that is very important, because if we look at our sense of self-worth, it is completely an egoic perception of who we are and how good we are. It's even as a child, we are taught to compare with ourselves with others. We are given social yardsticks on which we want to measure ourselves, peer pressure, opinions, viewpoints. Everything matters but our own spirit, and we get completely conditioned by that outlook. And so when we do something, in our thoughts, in our actions, we are completely conditioned by, oh, what is the organization going to think about me? What are my parents going to think about me? What are my friends going to think about this? Oh, what have I done? And sometimes to the degree that we can create even bigger disasters than the original failure. Like, for example, sometimes people commit suicide, they go into depression. One of the starkest examples we have is that of Judas, who hanged himself because he was unable to bear the weight of his sin of playing a part in betraying Jesus. And while Yogananda ji said that the best thing that Judas could have done was to spend his life in service to God and forgiveness, and spending the rest of his lifetime in prayer. And likewise, friends, where is our sense of self-worth? Is it in what someone else thinks about us? Are we placing it in a specific outcome, in a certain outcome? Are we having defined expectations of who we are and what we can be? If then it is time to assess or evaluate those perceptions that we have about ourselves, and we want to understand that these perceptions are limited. Sri Yukteswarji says in the autobiography of a yogi that the past lives of all men are dark with many shames, that man is unreliable as long as he is rooted in the ego. He says everything in future will improve if we make the right spiritual effort now. And that is the most important thing. What are we doing now? It does not matter what happened. God himself does not remind us of our past, so that we are not bound by what we have done in the past, but so we can move forward to the next step, to that next activity, to the next goal, to the next aspiration, that we keep moving forward. We are on a journey, and if we stop on our journey or go backwards, we are losing the joy of that journey. It's important to keep that forward momentum of always thinking, no matter how far we are set back in our goals or aspirations, through unexpected outcomes, that we keep thinking, what's my next step? What's my next step? That when we look at a valley from the foot of the mountain, we barely see a little bit of the valley, but when we see it from the mountaintop, we see the complete valley laid out before us. So it's important for us to withdraw ourselves from the exigencies of the moment or of the failure or of the situation and get into our inner center in that spine. At this point between the eyebrows, here lies clarity, here lies the view from the mountaintop, and we can see everything clearly. It's very important. Yogananda ji said, God does not mind our faults. He said he minds our indifference. Why do we make such a big thing about our faults and about others? That if if our true reality is the light, let's focus on the light. That what is coming across as a failure is actually a blessing in disguise. Can we discover the blessing? We can discover the blessing if we can bring a positive outlook to the situation. Yogananda ji said circumstances are neutral. They become good or bad depending on our outlook. How are we looking at things? How are we looking at people? Are we wanting to pin the blame on something outside of ourselves? The problem and the solution both is within ourselves. It is in our own consciousness. So when we hit a block, look at it as a door that needs to be opened. We don't want to run away from the door. We don't want to hit the door in frustration, but we want to find the key that will joyfully unlock the door and show us a bigger vista, a bigger panorama, and take us forward in our journey. There's a beautiful story I also wanted to share about this situation, which is currently slipping my mind. Sorry, I'll come back to it if it comes back to me. But this is important, friends. Yoga gives us the tools to overcome, to approach life with joy, with freedom. We sang the song, "Nothing on earth can hold me, rise, O my soul, in freedom." And that's the outlook that we want to bring to situations in life. That we don't bind ourselves or become cowed down by failures, but focus on rising in freedom. And that freedom is not about freeing yourself from that outer circumstance or that person, but freeing yourself from your own attachments that are binding you, that are drawing fear, that are drawing unexpected outcomes of failures. If we can clear that energetic blockage from our own consciousness, we will find the doors open towards greater light. Let's pick up these tools of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Gyan Yoga. These are very important tools that can help us have the right outlook towards problems or challenges. Bhakti Yoga says, see the light in everything. That when you're seeing something as a challenge, ask yourself, what is this situation or this person trying to tell me? What is the light? Ask God, ask gurus. What do you want me to learn from the situation? Look at it as a gift from God that will unfold your own highest potential. Karma Yoga tells us that we are channels, that this body, this mind is a vehicle for the infinite spirit, the spirit of infinite possibilities. It is not limited by what you perceive through your senses, but this is a vehicle for great noble deeds. And failure cannot stop the nobility of man's character. Somebody once said that we are not building buildings here, but we are building character through what we are building. And let's look at how we can use failure to build our character rather than weaken it. It depends on what we draw out of that situation. Karma Yoga tells us, act without attachment to the fruits of your action. That we are channels for goodness, let the goodness flow through us, but don't be bound by your attachment to a specific outcome. Work with non-attachment, serve with non-attachment. And we all know this, friends, that the very breath that gives us the energy to carry on every day is not in our control, that it is a source of spirit, that it is a gift of God. So if we have not created ourselves, if we do not have any control over our breath, we are channels. Let's surrender ourselves to the giver of all gifts, to the giver of our breath, and let's ask him to flow through us. And the fruits of what we achieve through this energy, through the power that flows through our body, mind, and spirit, also rightfully belongs to him. So when we bring that understanding, that wisdom to our daily activities, we find a better discrimination, we find energy to be more hopeful, to be more positive, and to be able to turn what looks like a dark situation into one of light. Always remember, friends, success, failures, these are polarities. These also belong to the play of duality. Our job is to find that midpoint of this duality, and that midpoint is joy. And if we can look at all situations in life from that vantage point of joy, of bliss, which is our true nature, we will find a story there. We will find lessons, we will find learning that brings meaning to our quest, that we will find the purpose of our goal, of our quest, and it makes our journey much more interesting, exciting, and as Swamiji said, it keeps you moving towards the goal. It helps us to keep concentrating on what we need to commit ourselves to in this moment. Let what is gone be gone, but let's move forward with joy, with hope, with the presence of divinity within us, and calling on the divine presence within us to continue to shine that light on which we can walk. Joy to you.